All right, here we go. Thanks for joining, everybody. This here is Script Camp's class on theme. Today we'll be talking about theme and dramatic argument as it pertains to storytelling, mostly focused on movies and features just because that is my area of expertise, but this does apply to all kinds of fiction. Books, pilots, no matter what it is you're working on, every story will have its own theme, and if you don't really pick a theme, then the audience kind of picks one for you. So it's best to go into this with a strong sense of intention and actually work towards cohesively working your way up towards building a dramatic argument rather than just seeing where it kind of falls. But we will talk about ways to sort of manage that and approach that in this class today. So thanks for joining. We are part of Script Camp. Most of our classes like this are taught in these stage channels, meaning that you do have to raise a hand if you want to speak and be heard aloud. So click that hand raising icon if you ever want to speak on the mic. And if you are offering things like loglines or scenes or things like that for help in our various events, then you should be ready to speak aloud and answer questions. So Script Camp and Word Camp, our two writing-focused servers, are two of the servers from Skill Camp, which is this big group of servers. You see we have lots of different ones focused on different topics: filmmaking, animation, coding, learning languages, graphic design. All these different camps that you can see here with lots of free classes, table reads, script swaps, writers groups on Script Camp and Word Camp. We also have some classes that are for our supporting members. So if you're interested in joining beyond just these free public open classes, then I would go to scriptcamp.net, and there you can sign up for unlimited membership, which includes access to every class and every event on every server, not just on Script Camp, but also on Word, Film, Code, Tune, Creator, Design, and Lingo camps. With over 100 hours of events every month, we have access to video library. You get huge discounts off consultations and proofreads, exclusive Discord channel access, and also you will get 100 script coins a month, or cryptocurrency as I like to call them, and you can spend those on things like table reads for your scripts, or silly merchandise, or on events like that. So check that out. You'll see all the things that you can purchase with those script coins if you sign up. And again, that includes every event on every server, not just on Script Camp. So that will also include events on things like Word Camp and Code Camp, which we'll show you in just a second. As for me, I'm mostly a screenwriter, feature-focused screenwriter, though I did write for Creepshow on TV, on Shudder. And I have been a rep screenwriter since 2017. I've placed in a few contests and things like this. You can read this here if you want to. I don't like getting way too into all this. But I mostly do horror, thriller, and action, and I also do, besides writing specs, I'm also doing rewrites and polishes and things like this, mostly on low-budget horror and thriller kind of movies. So here's some upcoming free classes. We have Spec Spotlight on May 19th. This is like a book club. This is the day after tomorrow. And this is where you'll be reading specs from professionals, and you will come in and be able to discuss and look at the things like theme and argument, perhaps, as aspects of that, but that's just one of many different topics to look at here. We have novel world building. That's going to be tomorrow, Saturdays, 12 to 2. We have novel writing classes, and we're currently doing outlining, working our way up towards that novel boot camp where you'll be starting a brand new book and writing it in 90 days. So the first half of the class is all going to be that planning and outlining, all that architecture stuff. That's, again, Saturdays, 12 to 2 on Word Camp. We have a new group called Mystery Writers Group, Mystery and Crime. Thriller people will love to come by on Wednesdays. May 22nd is the next meeting coming up, where there are events like readings and exercises and activities and all kinds of fun stuff in that genre. We have lots of other genre groups too, but that's our newest one. And then last, the Victory Lap is what I'm calling it for now, but this is kind of just like stupid third act tricks, I guess you'd call it. May 31st is just a new class on third act, and some new techniques and tips and things I've been working on. And we'll be doing a couple more of those in that time slot as well. Just fun, isolated classes you can just stop by without signing up. Come by anytime. Here's a bunch more coming up. Tone and genre on the 24th. Writing pilots on the 7th. That's the start of our new pilot boot camp. And that proceeds into week 1 of that class, which is on the 13th, where we go from week 0 to week 1, which is focused on story engine and logline. Sundays 10 to noon, we're running pilot boot camp with the new one starting on the 14th of June. One is currently running. And that runs Sunday mornings, but when it concludes, that flips to the Friday slot. And then Saturdays, we have novel outlining 12 to 2 every Saturday up until that novel boot camp starts. on the 8th of June, which is going to be the opening intro class, the overview of the 90-day novel kind of thing. And then we will start week 1 of that on the 15th. And after that, you got to subscribe. So definitely check out those couple free classes if you want to get a taste. And then sign up for the full course if you want to write that whole book. Plenty of recurring events and stuff coming up. June and July, new classes on Code Camp, UI design, and Discord bots. We have weekly Writers Lab on Script Camp twice a week. That's twice bi-weekly, right? Not weekly. So that would be on Saturdays, 4 to 6, and Fridays, 12 to 2. We also have various advanced labs that you have to apply for, but you can see there's a couple here, like advanced fiction and advanced screenwriters. So much stuff to do, so much to join, so much to do, so much to see, etc. You can sign up for just one single class if you really want to at scriptcamp.net/classes, but you will save a lot by signing up to become an unlimited member, which you can do for as low as $19 a month if you are signed up for the yearly option. You can see in the chat there's a poll. If you are interested in signing up for a program, you can click those little numbers, those blue little numbers in the chat, and indicate which program you're interested in, or if you have questions about it, or if you plan to sign up. If you're looking for where to find the chat, you can mouse over the Classroom channel on the left-hand side of your Discord window and find that small white word bubble that says Open Chat. Just click on that and you should open the Discord chat on the right-hand side of your screen. Okay, so now that we're all caught up, that's all the advertising we've got to do. Ideally, if you're interested in doing these, you will be signing up soon. But even if not, feel free to stick around these free classes and we're glad to have you. Shall we get into theme for today? So we'll be hearing a lot from Stephen King because he's done quite a lot of writing on this. And he kind of explains this overall by saying every book or every one worth reading is about something. And ultimately that's what theme is just kind of this answer to. It's more than just what is happening in the story, it's what does it mean? Why did we tell this story? What are you trying to say, or what is the author trying to say about life, love, human nature, the man's inhumanity to man, or whatever other topic or whatever other dramatic argument they're trying to build. It sort of clarifies the point of why you told the story in the first place, because stories are more than just amusing. They're various forms of life lessons. This goes back to just the original purpose of storytelling in the first place. If you look at first ever story was a horror story called Bear in Cave, Don't Go in Cave, then you can look at, well, it's a pretty easy dramatic argument for that story, right? Don't go in caves. It was a warning and a way to spread a social message or a way to ensure the survival of the species to help us in a way. Stories are more than just to keep us entertained for 30 minutes while you are on your cell phone. They are to teach us things and help us learn about the world and to make us better people. And it sounds maybe a little ridiculous when you're like, I only want to write movies about, robots shooting each other. How am I going to help the world or make a statement about humanity or something like that? Well, you absolutely will, and you can look at all kinds of stories, no matter what the genre, no matter what kind of audience they're writing towards. Every story ends up having some kind of dramatic argument. It doesn't mean that the audience has to agree 100% with that argument or with that statement or with that thought about the world. And some dramatic arguments are even deliberately built to challenge you and to go, do you agree with this? Is this how the world works? Should this be how the world works? Especially when you look at things like tragedies or tragedies based on true stories. You'll really see a lot of that kind of dramatic argument where it will be things like, this is how it is. Yes, it sucks. Are you okay with that? That's kind of the question that we're left with at the end of a lot of tragic true stories. Think of a movie like Fruitvale Station or something like this, right? Where it's like, yeah, that awful messed up thing happened in real life and the bad guys got away with it, basically. I mean, they got a slap on the wrist for murdering a guy. And then the last couple shots of that movie are real footage from the vigil for that actual guy that really died in real life, right? And that's sort of to say, the dramatic argument we built up to there is more of a lingering question that you're supposed to take into real life and ask your friends and yourself and, create these conversations. Because we built a sort of deliberately unsatisfying story with the express purpose of making you go, that wasn't satisfying. That wasn't the ending I wanted. That wasn't fair. You see what I mean? You can create this deliberately unsatisfying ending sometimes if it helps to further the dramatic argument that you're ultimately going on to create, whether that's a positive one, a negative one, or any kind of ambiguous one in between. So, just because a story ends in an unsatisfying way doesn't mean it doesn't have a dramatic argument. In fact, some of the best ones are created by these unfun endings. But then again, happy endings, or whatever we would call happy endings, have their own version of dramatic arguments that link very easily to that sort of ending too. Usually those are going to be, quote, happier and less challenging stories that are about good winning, love conquering all, things like this. Very familiar arguments that we've seen many times before, but doesn't make them any less true. Here's a general overview of everything we're going to do today. We're not going to actually go in this exact order, and I do have some different ideas and some new things to throw in here and there. But we will essentially be looking at what is theme. There's obviously no homework. Why do we have a homework thing? Yes, turn in your algebra. So yeah, there's no, this is not a boot camp class, so we will start by just going over what do we mean by theme, what is theme. We've kind of touched on this a little, but we will go on to build out that definition further. Theme and argument, this idea of argument, which we've been bandying about. How do you make an argument by talking to yourself? Anti-theme is another idea that's tied in with these. So anti-theme being sort of like the character or aspect of your story that is the embodiment of the opposite of what the ultimate theme will end up being. Usually the main character kind of embodies the anti-theme at the beginning, and then through the story they become the embodiment of the true theme as they understand the truth that they've been denying or trying to avoid, or they haven't been strong enough to accept yet in some way, at least in a positive arc story. We'll look at a new series of slides, which is brand new for this class, called Theme by Genre, and I have a bunch of new bonus tips for horror themes, just considering that is my normal area. And then we will be looking at some examples like Guy Climbs a Mountain, which is an old slide of mine that I've done a million times, so I'll go through it pretty quickly, but I just find it makes a pretty good basic illustration of what a dramatic argument is and how to kind of go about constructing one. And towards the end we will have time for, of course, plenty of questions, exercises, and then an open lab period to ask, what are you guys working on, especially if it's going to be questions related to theme and argument. Ideally they are in that same kind of realm, but we will just ask, what questions do you have? What would you like to work on? Whew, I think I'm talking too fast and it's making me exhaust myself, so let me just take my theater teacher's notes from throughout my whole life, which is always slow down. Don't sound like you have Hollywood cocaine energy. In fact, slow yourself. That's what I will do. So I don't want to collapse on cam from using all my breath. Alright, so let's start with some basics. We talked about this idea of dramatic argument. It's what your story is trying to sort of say about the world or human nature, humanity, existence, reality. It can be any size. It could be big or small. You can have a dramatic argument about how to be a better friend, or how to, what is this really old one? If you love someone, let them go. Like one of these kind of romantic or relationship-based themes. Your theme could be tied to all of existence, right? You could have a theme that's all about, look at something like Cormac McCarthy stories, and sometimes it's about like an old guy that works on a farm, but it's a story about like the inevitable entropy of the universe. You know what I mean? Like about the decline of the human character and like the death of the first man, which is all men, or something like that. Like these very literary kind of themes, which sometimes expand to become much bigger than the story that they are otherwise in. You could have a story about a guy just trying to eat a sandwich that is about, the futility of pursuing what you want, right? Like you could have a theme from any size of story that covers pretty much any type of subject matter. It's not like you have to write an epic sci-fi if you want to write a story about the passage of time. You can write epic sci-fi if you want to explore that idea of the passage of time through a sci-fi lens. Look at something like Interstellar, right? Where time is kind of one of the great enemies that the characters are facing in that story. And it's about kind of being afraid of time, about how we will, run out of time on Earth, we'll run out of time with our family, and unless, people take drastic action and great people like these great scientists, unless they move the species forward and they take these huge risks and these huge leaps into the unknown, then we may run out of time, we may run out of resources, we may, fall into ruin in whatever way. So the subject matter and the genre are not exactly tied to the specific arguments you can make. There are certain tendencies within certain genres to gravitate towards certain types of themes that we will be talking about today, and some stories just kind of have to have like one of 5 different themes, more or less. It doesn't mean that they're limited or bad, and just because stories have the same theme doesn't mean that they're repetitive or expressing it in the same way. because a lot of the time we're going to get some of these strongest themes when they're actually something that we are, like the argument isn't something we've never heard before. It's actually something we already know, but you're telling it to us in a new way that we wouldn't have expected. You're sort of reminding us of something that we know to be true deep down on the inside, and that can be some of the absolute strongest storytelling. In fact, if you try to make up a brand new theme that's never been expressed before, you have to sometimes walk us through a lot of extra steps, and it can get quite complicated to build a dramatic argument using building blocks that the viewer is not even familiar with. So, like, I wouldn't try to innovate way too much with the type of theme that your story can have. Simpler themes are not worse. A story that has a more straightforward, clearer dramatic, like we really require simplicity and clarity for themes to come through. So don't overthink or overcomplicate this. And I think that I should have had a whole slide about this, but I think I do want to touch on this idea of muddy or murky character arcs that end up obfuscating the theme by being too nuanced. So movies are like short stories. They're not novels, right? Like, we don't have tons of space to go into every little tiny detail and like the specific nuances of what the characters want, but they don't exactly want it, but they have misgivings about it in this way. But it's complicated. It's not that great. I mean, think of this, right? What is Lord of the Rings kind of generally about? The dramatic argument. It centers on this idea that it is through the brave acts of ordinary people that evil can ultimately be overcome. It's not about grand heroics. It's about, the way that we will defeat evil is by the common man keeps on going, keeps trying, and keeps trying to preserve the small and peaceful life that he's created for himself, right? Pretty simple. You can see where that comes from. Tolkien's history as a soldier in World War One, as somebody that was forced to go on his own sort of ultimate quest and come back home, and he was broken by this war in the same way that Frodo was ultimately broken by the burden of the ring. But how messy would it be if, think of the first 30 minutes of the movie, depending on if you're in extended or normal, or the first, 50 pages of the book if you're in the books. We see the Shire, and we spend a lot of time there. And what's it like? Is it nice, or is it bad? Feel free to weigh in sometimes I'll just ask a question and throw it to the room. You can use the text chat to weigh in, or you can raise a hand. Who knows their Lord of the Rings? Nacho. Okay. Wait, I thought Nacho doesn't know Lord of the Rings, or doesn't read it? Hasn't seen them all? Something?
Yeah, I guess I don't know Lord of the Rings too much, but I guess one thing I'd say, it seems like, theme kind of means like a lot of different things, as you're like in school, it's sort of like sometimes like your English teacher is trying to drill into you, it's like, man versus something, or you know what I'm saying? So there maybe like just the idea, like what is the theme is sometimes like people sort of define it in different ways, I guess. But so could you repeat the question about Lord of the Rings?
What is it like in the Shire?
It's peaceful.
Yeah. How do we know?
Because the hobbits sort of like are more preoccupied with like just the little fun daily lives in the village sort of thing. They're not worried about big I don't know. They definitely don't seem to be interested in big adventures. Most of the hobbits, right?
So would you say
they're just
happy there?
Definitely.
Okay, yes. So we know that life is good in the Shire because everyone pretty much seems happy there. And it's really cute, wouldn't you say? It seems like there's two jobs. There's carrot farmer and guy who works at farmer's market. So
yeah.
And we're talking simplicity and clarity of theme, right? So this is the world that we're trying to preserve and save, this life of simple, ordinary people. How weird would it be if... Well, there's also a lot of political corruption in the Shire. Also, in the Shire, they have slavery. Also in the Shire, Frodo's not sure he likes it that much. Wouldn't that really complicate the story? Because it's like, what are we fighting for? Why are we going through this whole
Right.
class? Like, what's our basis? What are we trying to work back towards? Let's use another example because I know you maybe are not the biggest LOTR fan. How about Last of Us? That's another example that a lot of people know. So you know Last of Us.
Yeah, I saw most of the first season.
Oh, okay. So what's the basic arc of the character?
Um, so sort of going from, you know, like jaded to caring about this character that he's transporting.
Yeah.
You know, caring about this kid. Initially, it's more like, isn't it about trying to get a generator or something?
Whoa, what? No,
If
that's
I bring
okay.
this kid here, I get a generator. Or that's what it seemed like. I think in the first episode, it was like, all right, we'll give you the generator, but you got to bring this kid to the other city.
That's just a really small part of the first episode. It's not about a generator.
Okay.
But regardless, so he's doing a job basically, right? At first, he's escorting this girl from one city to another. But why does all this matter? He lost his daughter in the prologue. Remember?
Yes.
So he loses the daughter. So what if Joel wasn't sure he wanted to be a dad and didn't really like Sarah that much? Wouldn't it be a weird arc?
Yeah. Sarah is who is Sarah?
Sarah's his daughter.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
If in the intro it was like, I'm not really sure she's that great. I'm not even sure I like kids. And then he loses her. And then he goes on this whole journey. Then he bonds with Ellie. And then what were we fighting for? Like, what were we trying to get back to? It's murky because it's too nuanced. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So
I have
that comes up a lot in go ahead.
I've sat through a lot of extremely nuanced films and film festivals that suffer from this issue.
Right. Exactly. So it's not to say that good stories don't have nuance. They do, of course. Movies have their own type of nuance. But in order for theme to really become clear, we need simplicity and in order to create that clarity. That's why I'm always talking about clean, beautiful character arcs that don't have this murkiness in them. Like too much nuance, too much of every time you're like, well, the character kind of sort of wants that, but he also sort of doesn't. But he also kind of hates it, but he also kind of wants it. Like, does Frodo sort of kind of want to save the Shire? Like, does Joel sort of kind of love his daughter? What are you talking about? Like, you have to have that, like, base level of simplicity and clarity for a lot of this to come through. So, like, in terms of clean character arcs, don't use too much nuance. Don't have your characters' opinions be, like, I know, and it's hard because in real life sometimes people do have these really complicated feelings like that. And if you went through the whole, like, of Joel and Sarah's relationship, you'd probably find a couple moments that weren't that great, right? But we don't include those in the prologue because those would muddy the theme. Like, of course they had some times they weren't getting along together, but we are curating such a small section of these people's lives to show. And in showing only a very small curated section of people's lives, you have to choose the ones that are going to build the argument that you want, which is, in this case, going to be about, you know, first he swears off of ever being close to someone loving again because he loses the closest person to him. And then through his journey and his trials and his bonding with this new person, he comes to see, you know, this person needs me. She could become my new sort of surrogate child, and I could get back to that happiness that I had before. But if we didn't have that happiness to begin with, it just wouldn't work. It wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, this is really great point. Like, I think some writers struggle a little bit because they're worried about their story turning out too cliche. Or I'm hitting them over the head with this. But there's a difference between dumbing something down and sort of muddling it with too many different, ideas or concepts.
Right. Too many different perspectives, too many nuances, too like, and like, I understand why people struggle with this because people in real life are very messy like that, and have very weird opinions, or like, sometimes if you have a character especially that's like, striving for one thing throughout the movie, maybe that person hates that thing now and again, or maybe people in real life would, sometimes you hate the thing that is your number one passion. But if you try to include, like, the more you try to make movies like real life, the more the theme can suffer, because movies aren't real life. They're a very curated, very short, like, slice of someone's, or like series of slices of someone's life. And that, and real life isn't really trying to build a dramatic argument. Real life just kind of happens. But we are sort of being these curators and being these ones who we have to decide which slices of this person's life would go on towards towards making a specific point. I guess that's what I'm getting towards ultimately. Thank you for being my interrogation guinea pig. Maybe we have a question or comment from Dakota. Go ahead.
Hello, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Awesome. So, first of all, I love this topic so much. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. So glad this is happening. So, I've always thought about, especially when you're talking about nuance and complexity versus simplicity and things like that. When you're dealing with theme, I think it's important to really understand that just because a theme is simple, you can have nuance in the simplicity of matters, meaning that you can, as a painter does, right? And when you look at a Rembrandt painting, there are very broad strokes. He uses broad strokes to make something incredibly beautiful. And you can do the same thing with film. You can be very broad and still get everything you want to. You don't have to get into every single detail of every little thing, because Rembrandt did not do that. If you really study paintings, you see this a lot, where he doesn't do every single eyelash. He does just little bitty broad strokes that make the illusion of the eyelash. That's basically what you're doing here, is you are just getting across whatever the idea is, whatever the theme is, in the best way possible, using as many broad strokes as you can while still keeping it simple. Simple, simplify, simplify, simplify. To quote my animation professor, simplify, simplify, simplify. That is all I have to say about that. Great conversation so far.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great contribution, and this does tie sort of into our earlier class a couple of weeks ago on that we're looking at paintings and talking about how many brushstrokes do you need to convey a certain image, because Bob Ross can do just a swoosh and that's a whole mountain, and some people can spend a year on a painting of a mountain, right? So you do have to determine how many brushstrokes you actually need to communicate this idea, and the fewer the better, just given how movies work. It's such a short amount of time to be watching a story, and you can't guarantee people are going to pay that much attention through all of it. You don't know when someone's going to take a bathroom break or look at their phone or whatever. So not that we have to factor that into the story, but just you have to be able to tell it in as clear and simple of a way as your genres and your subject matter sort of allows you to. Thank you for the comments, Dakota. Here's a question from Luke. Do genres have dramatic arguments or themes? Romance being love conquers all. That's one of the big examples. Yep. My personal definition of Western is one man's law. I'm wondering if there are other genres have easy to convey themes. Yeah, I have a whole series of slides on it coming up. Okay, let's keep going. So, I'll skip through these slides a little bit, but these are abridged from the Craig Mazin episode of Script Notes called How to Write a Movie, which there's a link to in the slideshow. But we've covered a lot of this. It's just a concept or a topic, a theme, brotherhood, war. Not really, because there's not really an argument there. You're not really saying something intrinsically. That's like a topic. That's like a subject matter for the story. Is science a theme? No. But once you start making a clearer statement, something that actually could be argued either way, you're going to go ahead and make a case for this idea in your story. Think of this, right? Like, it's better to be dead than to be a slave. If you love someone, you have to set them free. These are arguments. These are things that aren't guaranteed to be true. Brotherhood, race, justice, revenge, these are just topics. And every story will have a topic and multiple topics sometimes. Usually a movie has one topic. Books sometimes will have more topics. And ultimately this theme as well. That's more of the authorial statement and what the work is trying to ultimately say about that topic. The quality of an argument is not related to the quality of a script. It might seem a little cliche to have a very straightforward, easy theme, like, well, love is good, war is bad, but some of the best stories ever told have a dramatic argument that boils down to war is bad or love is good, right? Let's come back to this question of what are some of the themes of our favorite movies later, once we have built out more groundwork for how this actually works. So, first of all, is theme super important? I would say don't worry too much about it on your first draft through. You're not always going to have that really clear sense of what it is. Sometimes you're just like, I thought of a cool idea for a monster or a heist, or I thought of a really funny situation or character that I want to do a story about. And you can always start there. You can always start with, what if there was a movie about a green ghoul? Nothing wrong with that, especially when the green ghoul is at the heart of the high concept hook in the first place. Like, you should pretty much, in terms of high concept writing, be starting from the foundation of something cool that would look good on a poster, that would look good on a lunchbox. Like, you're trying to find something simple and easy to express, that's clear what it is, it's clear what kind of genre it is, and it's clear what kind of fun you would have in that story. So it's fine to start from that perspective of just what would just be fun, interesting, funny, scary, whatever emotional effect that you're going for is. That's always totally cool. This is more something that you're going to conceive in your second draft, and once you have that first draft really down, and you have the basics down, you can start to bring certain things out of it. It's not always going to become really apparent what that central dramatic argument is, and it's easier to sort of maybe finish the story and then kind of mentally audition a couple different dramatic arguments that might make sense given the pieces that you've laid out. And it could take a reader to really help you figure out what it turns out your story was kind of summing up to, or what point you were ultimately trying to make. Typically in the beginning, the story features a main character that believes in the opposite of what they're going to end up with at the end. This is like the kind of classic positive arc, though you might be able to tie that to a negative arc if your character starts the story as a good person and then ends up becoming a bad one or a worse one, for instance. You can totally do that. That's a downfall, right? A tragic downfall. Your Anakin Skywalker kind of arc. But in any case, most of the time in stories, we start with a character that's achieved that level of stasis and things not changing. They're in some kind of cycle of normality. Their ignorance of the theme may have gotten to this nice place in the first part. Like, think of Mr. Scrooge, right? He's an old miser who doesn't understand, he doesn't value or respect his employees. He doesn't care about his family, and he's just a douchebag, right? But that's gotten him to this point of stasis where he's rich and lives in his tower and, has a big Christmas goose every dinner and doesn't share with anyone. And he's fine with that. He doesn't think there's anything wrong with that. He thinks he's happy. Ultimately, stories about miserable people learning a lesson are going to often be about them not realize. It's like they have something they want, which is to stay in their comfort zone of the life they've built. And then ultimately they're going to sort of come to realize what they need, which is that point of the story. And a lot of the time, that intersection of what they want and what they need, or the way that one contradicts the other, is where you really start to clarify theme and dramatic argument in the first place. It doesn't mean they're happy in their stasis. They don't have to be happy. Their default could be miserable. Think of your Harry Potter or your orphan story, your Cinderella. Every day, once upon a time, there was Cinderella, and every day she would get beaten by her stepsisters while she scrubbed the floor, whatever it is, right? And that's her stasis. And depending on if they're happy in their stasis or not, that's going to really inform your catalyst, of course. This is a little outside of the realm of theme, but generally, if your character's in a place of stasis that they like, then the catalyst is going to be something that jeopardizes their place of happiness. Whereas if they're in a world they don't like, then the catalyst is going to offer them an opportunity out of their unhappy stasis. In any case, it's our job to disrupt that stasis with that inciting incident or that catalyst that shakes up their life and gets them into the action. But what kind of lesson are they going to be learning? How do we figure out what they need, how they need to start, and where they need to finish? So always, when doing high concept features, I do always come back to this just basic idea of what did you think? What was the cool thing you started with? If I started with just, well, wouldn't it be cool to do a mountain climbing movie? Then that's a fine starting point. Now, would climbing a mountain be scary, dramatic, and interesting to watch on screen? Yeah, of course. Are there a ton of mountain climbing movies? Not really. There's some, but like, I could totally see just starting from, I want to write a movie about mountain climbers, right? And then from there, that's why I call this the guy climbs a mountain movie. Is that we have the topic, we have the subject matter, we have the kind of adventure that we're on. It's going to be like a wilderness survival thriller, right? So the sort of man versus nature type of story. And then from there, we might imagine, okay, it's about a guy climbing a mountain. He's kind of conquering that mountain in a way, like he's sort of, surmounting the obstacles that it presents. What might be something that you would learn from that? Well, I guess to appreciate how difficult that was. So nature is to be feared and respected. Climbing mountains, very hard, right? And that might lead you to the path of, this is the sort of story algebra you can do at the very beginning of the process, right? If we're wondering, okay, he has to climb a mountain, he has to learn that nature is to be feared and respected. I have to ask, what's the inverse of that? Nature is not to be feared and respected. Okay, what do we do with it instead? Exploit it for profit? strip it bare and rip up the resources and line our pockets because, cha-ching, cha-ching, who cares about nature? That's where we sort of have to start. So if your character is going to go from go towards learning this lesson in your theme, this sort of thing that just jumped out of your mind of what would be like a clear, a thing that almost anyone would learn from a series of obstacles like this, and then ask yourself, what's the inverse of that? Who would have the hardest journey going through that? Who believes the complete opposite of that? So we are going to go with the fracking engineer. And then, so you might even think of this as starting from the basis of, okay, I want to do a movie about a guy who climbs a mountain. Who's the best hero for that? I don't know. A guy that hates mountains? Who hates mountains? Nobody really hates mountains, but a guy that maybe blows them up and gets rich off of that. After a rock slide strands and paralyzes him at the base of a mountain, a callous fracking engineer must battle wild animals and the elements as he climbs to the summit to find rescue. There we go. There's a log line that takes that basic idea of character that starts embodying the anti-theme, a callous fracking engineer. We've given him a situation where he's going to be forced to dig down deep and come to realize the enormity and the truth of the opposite of that initial idea, which is that nature is not to be exploited. You have to appreciate and come to protect it. Ultimately, is where we want him to end up. So maybe along the way he's going to bond with an injured, bird that he nurses back to health. This is the City Slickers kind of dramatic argument. And then at the end he's like, I can't be a fracking engineer anymore because I healed my pet bird, and I can never harm the habitats that I've come to, intimately experience and appreciate on my own. It's a stupid story, but sometimes you have to look at the dumber, simpler ones to get that really, really just clear, straightforward idea. Now, we don't want to overcomplicate things. We don't want to, at the beginning, show, well, he sort of likes nature. He kind of appreciates it. He feels bad about being an engineer. No, that's muddying the theme. He doesn't feel bad about it at the start. He is completely airheaded hard-headed about this. He's never once considered the effect of the oil spills or the fracking or any of, the mining operations, the pollution in the streams, chopping down trees. That's all fine to him. He grew up in a family where that was normal. If we make it too nuanced at the beginning, remember, it won't come through clearly in terms of the simplicity of the arc. So don't overdo it. He hates mountains at the start, or thinks mountains are dumb and not worthy of respect at the very least. And through climbing this mountain, that is how he will gain that appreciation. So I won't linger on this too much, but that's just my dumb example of what is a very simple way to illustrate this, by starting with just, what is the character doing? What is the obvious lesson that could be learned from that? Or what would the takeaway be that an average person might gain from that? And then ask yourself, who embodies the opposite of that? And that's how you can sort of arrange that basic sort of story algebra at the very beginning of the process to figure out, well, where does the character start and where do they need to go? Any questions so far? No questions so far. Let's check the chats. Luke tells us in Fern Gully the guy's a lumberjack. Yeah, exactly. The big bad forestry corporation is going to chop down the rainforest, and so our central relationship love interest is he's not exact. I don't think he's framed as the protagonist, because I think, is it Crystal? Is that her name? The little fairy? That's our hero. But in any case, he basically has the central internal journey of the story, because he does the Avatar thing. He gets shrunken down to be a fairy size as well. He has a whole adventure with the fairies. He comes to see the beauty and natural, the value of their habitat and all the intricate workings of it and all the ecosystems, and he comes to appreciate and love it, and he splashes in a stream and he eats a big berry and all that kind of stuff. And then by the end, he's fighting against the lumberjack people because he has come to appreciate this way of life by living in it and by gaining that empathy and understanding through experience. So yeah, same, really simple, Last Samurai, Dances with Wolves, Fern Gully, Pocahontas, Avatar. That kind of outsider joins the noble savages would be like the kind of archetype of that story. Let's go into a theme by genre. So which themes are really clear or always, I'm going to start with some of the more obvious ones. Luke, why don't I just bring you up because you had this question before, if you're able to speak aloud on the mic.
Sure. What was my question?
Let's go into this idea of theme by genre, right? How about this genre?
Which genre is this? Christian? Oh,
Yeah.
the theme would be I don't know, Jesus saves, I guess.
Yeah, more than he saves, but I mean, yes, he does, but because of that, we should believe in him, right? Like, he's the answer. We should turn to Jesus. Like, every person should turn to God, because God will solve all your problems, essentially. Like, he will, even when things get tough, even when you are beaten down like Job, then you should find your way to God, and that's always going to be the dramatic argument in this genre.
Pretty much, yeah. All your problems are ultimately going to be solved by turning to God in the end.
Right, and no matter what twists and turns the story takes, by the end we always basically have to get there, or else we're not in this genre anymore. If there's too much, again, with too much nuance, if you're like, well, but God's kind of okay, you could choose which God you really want to believe in if you insist. Like, that's not a Christian
Oh,
movie.
no. Definitely not.
No, and there's other faith-based movies as well besides just Christian, but I think most Americans would be more familiar with this one. I'm sure there are also, any religion you look at, there are stories that are intended to sort of espouse those really clear themes. So
I'm just thinking of an unfortunate side arc with a character named Aisha in God's Not Dead.
I've seen God's Not Dead, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of gross, but let's not talk about it.
Okay, we don't have to get into it, but basically, guess what the dramatic argument is? You gotta believe, dude. You gotta have faith. It's like the romance kind of thing, right? It's always going to end up with love conquers all. In this case, God is the answer.
Okay.
How about romance? We talked about this one.
How do these stories have to love conquers all.
Yeah, love conquers all, meaning, what's the ending going to be like?
Well, I think one of these might not be a romance by that definition, but the ending is usually going to be happily ever after.
Yeah,
or
Brokeback Mountain is a romantic tragedy, so that's a little bit
or even
outside of this, yes.
I guess in the case of like Titanic, even with one of the characters dying, it's still like she still loves him for the rest of her life or whatever. It's still
exactly
a romance.
So that even although that is technically a tragedy too, it is more classical romance because they end up with not necessarily a happy, fulfilling relationship at the end, but she never forgets him and she always has that love for him. And although it's kind of about Rose letting that go at the end when she drops the locket into the ocean, it's kind of like this was that one romance that never got out of my mind that made me who I am, kind of. So there's not going to be a character who at the end is like, well, but I'm not sure I like this relationship that much. I mean, it's fine, I guess, except when we go to look at something, I don't know, like The Graduate or something like this, that's a deliberate subversion of the typical romance tropes. But for the most part, characters that struggle and sacrifice to be together are rewarded with a happy and mutually fulfilling relationship. That is how the genre works, right?
Exactly.
How can you make stories interesting if the theme is always the same?
What do you mean? It's infinite ways to do it. Just execution. I don't know. You can sort of cross one genre with another that isn't commonly done, or you can. I don't know. It's why do people enjoy cheeseburgers that are the same every time they eat them? I don't know what to tell you.
You're spot on. All of that is very true. We like to see, like, part of the appeal of these stories, part of the reason people go to them is because they know what kind of feeling they want to have when they're done with it. Same with a cheeseburger. You want to, have a stomachache and regret your life after you're done with that, right? So we are signing up for a certain type of experience, and knowing the kind of dramatic argument that is tied to certain genres allows you to bake that into your process from the very start. But you know that because the audience is expecting it, and they already know what is generally going to happen, you have to surprise us with how it happens. I think that is ultimately going to be the answer to the question. How do we make stories interesting if we know how they're going to end? It's going to come down to surprise. We need to be surprised by something. It's not if it's not by what happens, then it's by how it happens, or the intensity of when it happens, or it happens in a way we've never seen before, or it happens with a person we never thought it would happen to, or any of those other things. You got to find the surprise, and that's really key to just making what might feel otherwise like more genres really work. Okay. Let's get a little more dig a little deeper, these next ones won't always have as obvious of a type of theme, but what kind of themes do action stories typically have?
A one-man army. I don't know. They're all about impossible odds, stunts. I don't know what the theme might be.
A lot of the time, action stories come down to the ideas of like the weak versus the strong, right? Like, don't mess with the little guy because you never know who you're messing with. That's a dramatic argument. Death Wish type stories that I know you're a big fan of, right?
Okay, right.
Or you can only push a man so far until he'll take matters into his own hands. Or
First Blood.
First Blood, sure. Like they drew First Blood, they pushed me too far. They just kept pushing and pushing until like everyone has a breaking point. And when you find some people's breaking points, you will be, they will annihilate you in your whole little town. So yeah, a lot of the time, action themes are going to revolve around questions of power. Who should have power? Who has the power to take from others or to get revenge on others? Revenge is another big area of action. Sort of asking things like, how far will you go to make things right? How far will you go to get justice or to punish someone that's done wrong? Think of True Grit, right? The wicked flee where none pursueth is the quote that opens that movie. And it kind of goes into this. Go ahead.
Would you consider Conan action?
Yeah, that's action adventure.
That's all about power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's tied to sort of the riddle of steel, in a way, which his dad brings up at the beginning.
Yeah, which is stronger, flesh or steel? Spoiler: the will is stronger.
Right, exactly. So, but steel also helps, it turns out. So, action stories almost always revolve around questions of power, and who has the right to take it, who has the right to get it back. When should you or should you not exert your power over others? So, not all of them. Like sometimes they will also tie into something else, right? Like sometimes they will have a romance subplot or something like that can sort of angle the theme in a certain direction. What about comedy?
Does comedy have one theme?
No, not one theme.
I mean, comedy is so many different things. Comedy is just whatever makes you laugh. I don't know what comedy is.
So we have different types of comedies, right? What do we have behind us? This is the let's think of the Apatow subgenre.
Okay. Fun and games. What's the theme of that?
Is there a movie called Fun and Games? Wait, what do you mean?
No, I'm trying to zero in on the theme. I don't know. It's characters struggling. It's like,
Yep.
I
Go ahead.
I don't know. I'm drawing a blank.
That's okay. So a lot of comedies are relationship-based stories, right? The Apatow subgenre are sometimes called the bro-coms, right? These are sort of the stories about friendship. Who should you be friends with? Which friendships are worth keeping, and which ones are toxic or bad for you in whatever way. Comedy almost always will revolve around characters that are geeks, losers, nerds, and underdogs. So often they will sort of be full triumphant subgenre of stories. They're not going to be about somebody who's big and strong crushing the weak. They're going to be about the little guy getting one over on the big guy against overwhelming odds, right?
Okay.
So especially if we're in the Apatow world, these are mostly centering on male friendships. Superbad is probably the clearest example of this. But all of them are. What's the other really big one? The sort of like the role models, everything with Paul Rudd. This is 40s. You're grown ups. Or not grown ups. What was it called?
Step Brothers.
Step Brothers also revolves around similar idea of like friends and family. So almost always comedies are going to be relationship stories, and they're going to be linked to themes of friends and family, and which relationships are good and which ones are not so good. There's a lot of exceptions, though, and spoof and parody movies are in their own sort of other world where they almost don't have dramatic arguments. Spoof movies are almost kind of laughing at the idea that they even need one. So within that specific subgenre, you have your own different sort of rules that are tied to it, and you can have in like a scary movie or something like that, you can like your dramatic argument can be fart joke. Like you don't have to have if you ended on if you're getting laughs in a spoof genre it doesn't matter what you're doing. Like literally, it's essentially the cinematic equivalent of clowning. If you're getting laughs, it's working. And then we have some other subgenres as well. We have like dramedies, which are almost always again going to be about family relationships. More so than Friends, dramedies are usually about families. We have dark comedies, which are sometimes have a little bit more like thriller style plot lines, where it's gonna like Weekend at Bernie's is almost like a thriller style plot.
Often involving death.
They often do, not always, but they dark comedies often can involve elements of death and destruction in these things.
8 heads in a duffel bag.
Right.
Weekend at Bernie's, you mentioned. Yeah, black comedy and death kind of go hand in hand.
Right, and those are usually still going to fall under that realm of like the fool triumphant. Even the dumb everyman, if he tries hard enough and if he learns his lesson, then he can still win against the big evil corporation or against the tough himbo with the six-pack. Seth Rogen can get one over and he can get the girl because he learns to be a better guy. And no, he's a lazy stoner, sure, but he learns what love means, and that's what that mean himbo with the six-pack will never have. So,
okay,
go ahead.
And when Harold and Kumar make it to White Castle, I'm sure it's not about the burgers. I'm sure they discover the meaning of life or whatever.
I actually, believe it or not, have not seen the first Harold. I saw the
second I haven't either.
Not the first one, but it's probably, the real White Castle was more than likely the friends they made along the way.
Exactly.
And that's one
like, I haven't seen it, but I've seen it. I've seen everything like it.
Right, exactly. The second one was pretty funny. Do I have one more slide for this? I do. We were talking about this. That's why I brought you up for this.
Oh, yeah, one man's law. So arguably, my definition of the Western is one man's law. It's about the protagonist sort of being in this lawless place and sort of having to impose his own code or his own system upon it. That's not always a he, but usually it's a he.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so these Westerns often do come down to themes linked to the idea of civilization versus chaos. And the main character representing often a force of one or the other, and then the antagonist embodying the dark version of the other thing. So if your hero is going to be a criminal, then we have who's your villain going to be?
Outlaw, obviously.
Did you say an outlaw, or did you say the law?
An outlaw.
An outlaw. So if your hero is an outlaw, you can have another outlaw as the villain, that's true. But I was thinking more in terms of if we're doing civilization versus chaos, then your hero is an outlaw, so your villain is like a mean sheriff.
You said
right?
Hero is the outlaw? My brain is malfunctioning.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay.
So
if the hero is the outlaw, then if the villain... Hold on, start over.
If the hero is the outlaw.
The hero is the outlaw, then the villain is the lawman.
Yeah, exactly. How do you make a lawman into a villain? I thought cops only ever did the right thing.
I mean, Copland, the corruption or whatever,
Exactly. Yes.
Or the way they enforce the law is too harsh or too whatever it is, or there's a million ways to do it, you could just do Outlaw of Yossi Wales, you're just a member of an enemy faction or whatever. You're just opposed, or the Hatfields and the McCoys. You're just a family that feuds against another family.
Mm-hmm.
And they can represent those sort of law or chaos ends of the spectrum.
Right. And it sort of just depends what the fun of that particular story is. It's similar with, you can look at medieval, like Robin Hood type stories too, right? How do we root for a criminal? Well, because good and evil are not tied to whether you follow the law. And stories like this revolve around these sorts of questions. They say things like, it's up to strong men to make their own law. Sometimes, like you mentioned, it's about laying down your own code of justice and imposing that on a harsh world. And that is kind of drawn to some extent, I think, from the very basics of what are people doing in the Western genre, right? They're settlers that are imposing their own, like this is a very classic American genre for this reason, isn't it? Because it's about taking that untamed, quote, wilderness and cutting a path through it, making your fortune from it, and staking your own claim in that world. And so the stories kind of take on that. They're not always going to be about man versus the environment. They can be, and man's relationship with the environment is a really big part of Westerns. And sometimes in a sort of racist way, lumping in like indigenous peoples with the big bad environment that needs to be tamed or conquered. We would see that in older westerns. It's like, we have to deal with all the various obstacles of this land, including rattlesnakes, dust storms, those pesky natives, droughts, and stuff like that. It's like, wait, go back. That's obviously not the best way to other people nowadays, but you can see how the genre just has these elements of laying down the law and carving out your own path and built into it based on just the essentials of this is about people trying to hack it in a harsh environment. Any other thoughts on this?
It doesn't always have to take place in the Wild West either. Sometimes, like, the West is just a blank sort of canvas for the Western to take place on, and it can take place. I think Brokeback Mountain takes place in the '60s. That's technically a Western. There's sort of like sci-fi Westerns that take place on like alien planets or. Judge Dredd, that's one man's law for sure.
Yep.
So there's definite crossover and with other genres.
Right. And yeah, you're not constrained necessarily to the initial setting and time period. There is a classical time period that is just, like, not very few genres actually have like regions and time periods associated with them. This is one of the few that actually does. But you're not strictly limited to that. And there are some really cool westerns set in Manchuria, in China, for instance, or Korea.
Oh, yeah.
The Good,
the Bad, and the Weird.
Yeah, that's one of the best ones. And there's a couple there's a couple more sort of Chinese westerns. There's one called Let the Bullets Fly, which is set in 1920s China, which is pretty cool.
Ghost in the Darkness takes place on the savannah. It's a kind of a western.
Oh, right, sure. You could, yeah. So African settings can sometimes have
and then
Western vibe.
Australia, there's Quigley Down Under.
Yes, definitely. So and yeah, I think I've seen one or two actually just straight up Australian westerns that you would think was set in America.
Oh, there's
almost.
a bunch.
What's the one with Guy Pearce? The Proposition.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
It's like it's just like a classic American western that just is set in Australia because it's like, well, their environment was just as lawless and ruthless. Okay, so and I have one more, and then so let's go to this, and then I will touch on I'll give some of my personal brand new tips on horror themes. What kind of themes do horror stories have?
Be afraid.
Cautionary.
So, God, there's too many horror stories.
But you're right. So you said be afraid, meaning they're cautionary stories a lot of the time, right?
Yeah. Or, I don't know, Frankenstein and Dracula are sort of, I don't know, allegory. They can be political. They can talk about sort of current fears that people have, or current sort of, I don't know. I'm circling. I'm on the far edge of the solar system, I think.
No, I think you're on track. You're right. So they can. There's different ways to play this. Of course, we have, especially in this wave of the A24s and things like this, the modern social issues that are tied to horror stories, and that might be making dramatic arguments about different things that, different political ways that we can live or behave or make laws or things like that. They might be about culture in interesting ways nowadays that maybe we didn't always think they were. I think a lot of the early slashers and things like this were very moralistic and had a very clear sense of what message they were trying to send too, right?
I think a body horror is an easy one, because all body horror is secretly about getting old, I think.
Really? That's
fear of aging, fear of that kind of thing.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of that idea, but I think you're right. Or getting old or getting sick or things like that. Any of the ways that just you have no control over terrible things happening to your physical form. So yeah, horror stories are very often going to be cautionary in that they're saying, don't mess with this. Remember the first story ever told was Bear in Cave? It's kind of like that, right? Don't go in cave, because bear perhaps in cave. So a lot of them also are going to revolve around this idea of kind of like dark truths about real life. And it's going to be kind of giving us let me bring us to our next slide so I can find my words on this exactly. Horror allows you to have much bleaker and darker dramatic arguments than are typically palatable in other genres. the theme of a lot of slashers kind of ends up being this thing like evil never you can never kill evil, right? You can't kill it. Even in, what is it, Halloween Kills, everyone keeps going, evil dies tonight, but it doesn't die tonight. In fact, it never dies. You can shoot him 100 times, he keeps coming back. It's pretty nihilistic, this idea of no matter how much you fight,